The end of the first skirmish. Confusion, fear, a wounded man. Just a sample of what life on the line could be like. There may have been more than one man who wished he had stayed in Livorno. A communique from the front read, "The sector immediately south of the German Gothic line was relatively quiet today." Another report simply stated that the Germans had been observed digging in. 6 days later, on the 11th, elements of the 86th Regiment began probing into enemy territory, looking for ways in which the 10th might gain access to some of the heights the Germans held.
No one made much noise about those patrols. There was no mention of them in the press. We lost men on some of these patrols. And you know, a guy that's killed on patrol is just as dead as a guy that's killed in the big push.
Within 3 weeks of their arrival in Livorno, all remaining elements of the 10th that had been limbering up in rear areas began moving up to their pre-assault positions in and around the town of Vidiciatico. They passed men who had already been at the front.
We naturally spoke to them, eager to find out what battle was like, what combat was like, what bullets were like. And I remember how they told us about the horror that they had experienced, how death actually came to many of their comrades, how they narrowly escaped death, how they were wounded and they would never go back under any circumstances.
Here was the situation at the front as General Hayes saw it from his command post.
On my left is Riva Ridge, and on my right is Mount Belvedere. And on the right of Mount Belvedere is Mount Gorgolesco. Between Belvedere and Riva Ridge, that small humpback ridge was also held by the Germans. As you can see, the Germans had observation on all of our front. And it was essential to capture Riva Ridge to prevent them from looking down on our flank and rear when we attacked Mount Belvedere. The thing that disturbed me most in preparing for the attack was assembling the division in this sort of a punch bowl surrounded by the mountains that the Germans held. They had observation on the whole area that the division would have to come into to prepare for the attack. I felt quite sure if the Germans found out that the whole division was assembling in that area, that they would reinforce their troops and make it much more difficult. So the problem, first problem that I faced was try to slip the division in at night.
The American line runs from here down to this valley and northeast of Rocca Cornetta. We haven't got any reporters yet on their exact whereabouts on the western flank. Now, I've ordered out 2 patrols in strength. They're to capture any American in the 10th Mountain Division sector and return him alive to me, not to the intelligence.
Who's in charge?
Captain Kroner. He's a mountain man himself.
That night, an American patrol also went out.
Hans! Hans! Hier, Riva! Halt die Klappe da hinten und mach das Licht aus.
In the dark, they met. That night, no prisoners were taken. The entire division, more than 13,000 men, continued to move into and around the town of Vidiciatico.
After patrolling for a period of a week, we finally found 4 little paths that we could climb. We thought we could climb up the mountain. Now they'd had to go up single file. One German at the top of the mountain could throw hand grenades down and stop the whole show if we didn't gain surprise. So naturally, under a situation of that kind, the men would be a little nervous. You couldn't expect them to be otherwise.
And there was Mount Belvedere, serenely majestic, covered with landmines, and for the 4th time, the prime objective of the coming assault.
The first impression of Mount Belvedere from in front of Vidiciatico was that it was so far, far away and awfully high up. It seemed impossible that we'd ever be able to make that distance and ever be able to capture that mountain.
On the 14th of February, General Hayes told his commander, Major General Willis D. Krittenberger, that he was ready to breach the German line and to spearhead the 5th Army's advance into the Po Valley that lay to the north. He was given the green light. On the 15th of February, General Hayes dictated this order.
The 10th Mountain Division will attack on D-Day to seize, occupy, organize, and defend the Mount Belvedere, Mount Della Torresia Ridge, and prepare for action to the northeast. D-Day and H hour to be announced.
The Germans were well aware that something was up, but according to their records, there wasn't much they could do about countering our intentions. General Hildebrand was asked about the obvious absence of German aircraft.
Sie fragen mich nach der mangelnden Unterstützung.
You ask about the lack of support by our Air Force. Gentlemen, I can only reply that there were days, well, weeks, when I did not see a single German plane. There were many planes up there, but they were yours, gentlemen, not ours. It was extremely frustrating when a British or an American fighter plane made observations of our positions, and I had no way of going after it.
Some 10th Mountain Division veterans may remember this house. Farmer Giuseppe Lenzi has lived in it all his life. During the tense wait for D-Day that followed the General's combat order, a handful of men of the 86th Mountain Infantry holed up inside Lenzi's house. Giuseppe remembers their arrival and the day they left.
In febbraio del 1945.
In February of 1945, the Americans arrived at the village of Vidiciatico, most of them from the 10th Division. Then in one evening of that February, they began their advance on Mount Riva and Mount Belvedere, where they started a great battle.
As Giuseppe and other farmers watched the troops move out, another man helped guide one of our first probes up the sheer cliffs of Riva Ridge. His name, Gino Lanzi.
On the evening of February 19th, 1945, the 10th American Division began the seizure, the occupation of Mount Capalbuso. Slowly, quietly, to surprise the Germans who were sleeping.